All right, guys, so The Penguin has wrapped up, and we've done our extensive coverage on the entire series. You can go check out on all the past episodes of the Access Blockbusters Pod, as well as just individual segments that I've clipped on the YouTube channel, all the individual spoiler discussions that we've done for The Penguin. It's been awesome. I've loved the show. But then I wanted to transition, almost like we did with Venom: The Last Dance and with Null. I wanted to talk about what comes next, especially with specific characters, right? Because I think it was interesting with Venom: The Last Dance to think about a character like Null and think about what is his place now in the future. And with a character like Null and with a universe that is, let's be honest, as dysfunctional as the Sony universe of Spider-Man characters, it was an interesting question, maybe less so about, oh, it's really exciting that he might show up in Spider-Man 4 or whatever, and more of, is this actually going to happen? We have a little bit of a different case here, though, with Penguin, because obviously, if you didn't like the show, totally fine. But for me and for just so many other people out there, the show was fantastic. And I mean, we loved Oz in The Batman, the 2022 film. And that just led to this amazing show that we got in 2024. Now, The Batman Part 2 is coming out in 2026. So I wanted to take some time here and just talk about what the show had, the ramifications the show might have in The Batman Part 2. Now, a couple things here that I want to discuss, just the more objective things that have been talked about in terms of the reporting. So Colin Farrell has been doing some interviews, obviously, since the end of The Penguin, and he has revealed that as far as he knows, and he has not read a script, is what he said, for The Batman Part 2. Actually, it turns out James Gunn said recently that the script for Batman Part 2 has not been sent to him, so whether it's done or whether it's in whatever stage of doneness it's in, it's not fully ready, it seems like. But Colin Farrell says he hasn't read the script. However, he was told by Matt Reeves that he would have 5 or 6 scenes in the Batman Part 2, and that also he signed up for 3 Batman films. And also, on top of that, Matt Reeves, ever since the end of the Batman Part 2, at the end of the Penguin, has been making the rounds and basically been saying, yeah, we'd be really interested, and there's early discussion about a Penguin Season 2. So that's all really interesting. Let's add on top of that fact that, yes, spoiler alert for The Penguin if you haven't seen it, but Oz obviously survives. Not only does he survive, but he is the kingpin of Gotham's crime at this point, which makes sense, right? I mean, at the end of the Batman Part 1, you see Oz kind of looking over the city, and then we transition right into the show. But if you just went from the Batman Part 1 to the Batman Part 2, I think it would make a lot of sense, right? He seemed like he was going to be on top at the end of the Batman, and he is on top at the beginning of the Batman Part 2, which is what I presume. But there's a whole journey that happens in between there. But I think that for people who didn't watch the show, you'd be able to catch up pretty quickly. Now, the other interesting thing to think about here in terms of catch up and in terms of other things that you might have missed in The Penguin if you hadn't seen it is Sophia Falcone, because her entire character is developed in this one show, and yet she's kept alive at the end of The Penguin, and she receives a letter from a Batman character, Selena Kyle, obviously Catwoman, who is her half-sister as well. And so it remains to be seen, because I would think that Zoe Kravitz has a role to play in the Batman Part 2, one would think. It doesn't seem like they'd just be, parting ways and then you'd never hear from her again. So, I mean, it's possible. And then it's possible that maybe we get a Catwoman, Sophia Falcone series or something like that. Who knows? But I think that it's much more likely that we will see Catwoman come into play in the Batman Part 2. Now, these are the objective facts, right? These are the things that are true. And now we kind of have to extrapolate from here as to what we think will happen. And I guess the other thing I should mention is that the bat signal was looming over Gotham City at the end of the Penguin. Whether or not that indicates that Batman knew Penguin was behind all these things, or whether or not it was just more in response to the chaos that was happening with the gangs and the bomb that went off near Crown Point and all these other things, who knows? It's that part is not clear. But I think we have a lot of interesting things to then go off of and extrapolate on in terms of what actually comes next. So let's think about this. And I'm going to do this in a couple ways here. I want to talk about just in general what I am thinking and maybe even hoping for from the Penguin to the Batman Part 2. And then I'll give maybe a percentage of what, how likely I think it is that we'll see Oz in the Batman Part 2. For the select amount of scenes that I think he's going to appear in, because obviously I think it's pretty clear he will appear in the Batman Part 2, but I want to give a percentage of, I think it's going to be X% that we see Oz in the Batman Part 2 for X amount of time, And then I also want to give a percentage about how likely it is that we'll see Sophia Falcone, because I think that that's a little bit more up in the air, to be honest. So we'll talk about that. But before we get into that, I wanted to just give, general thoughts, like general impressions of what I think will happen based on the end of the Penguin and leading into the Batman Part 2. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think that much. I think the Batman Part 2 will be focusing on a different story, and I don't think Penguin will be the villain, the ultimate villain of the Batman Part 2. He might be for the Batman Part 3, maybe, or something like that. But I think that based on Colin Farrell saying he only has 5 or 6 scenes, I don't think that Penguin will have a major role, because I think in the original Batman, he only had about 5 or 6 scenes. Now, the word scenes is really interesting because scenes are you can kind of play fast and loose with that word, right? Scene could be something like a 30-second interaction between two characters, or it could be an entire car chase. Like I would consider, and maybe this is wrong of me, but in the Batman, I would consider that entire car chase between Penguin and Batman one scene, even though it's comprised of literally multiple scenes. But I don't think that they're referring to 5 or 6 scenes as in literal shots, right? I think that it's more just the story beat that they're on, right? And that's actually not a small amount of screen time. I think Oz in the first film had maybe 25 to 30 minutes of screen time, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have a similar amount of screen time in the Batman Part 2. I think more so than just being the ultimate villain, what I imagine for Oz, just based on the fact that he is now on top of Gotham, is that he might be making more of a political run, as well as doing, being that linchpin for all of the underground dealings that are going on here. Because he's trying to play it, have his cake and eat it too, right? He's trying to say, I want to maybe have some more political power, like he was saying to that commissioner guy, the politician, not commissioner, but the councilman, right, in Gotham. And I think that is something that we might start to see here, is a corrupt politician rising to power, but also the fact that he might be the broker for whatever's going on. Now, we don't know at this point who the villain of the Batman Part 2 is, so it could be anybody. It could be someone not even related at all to Penguin, but I have a suspicion that Penguin is going to play the role of broker for whoever this villain is and whatever he or she or they are up to in the Batman Part 2. So that's what I think Penguin's role is going to be. But I think 5 or 6 scenes, it makes sense. I don't think he's going to be the big villain. And I think that, we might have a lot more to explore in a Penguin Season 2. So I think that's where Penguin stands. Now, with Sophia Falcone, I'm interested to see what they have, going on for her, because, and this is the thing about doing television shows that are canonical to your universe. This is what I talked about maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago in the, previous episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, is that you have to be very careful with how you treat these characters. And Marvel has obviously stumbled, and we'll see how the DCU, James Gunn's DCU, handles this. But you have to be careful, because just bringing over television characters into live action and assuming that the audience member knows everything that's going on about them is a very faulty assumption. And it backfired big time, I think, with the Marvels, for example. And even with WandaVision to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, even though WandaVision quality-wise was incredible by most accounts, by most people. But it's just the fact that people were like, wait, I didn't watch the show. What's going on in this movie? I don't quite get the things that are going on in this movie. Like I've been saying, I think the Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Captain America Brave New World is going to be a more seamless transition, because I think that you can just go from the end of Endgame to be like, okay, now he has the shield, now he's Captain America. I think people who just watch those trailers could be like, oh, that makes sense to me, he's Captain America now, and we move on, right? That makes sense to me. But I think that, in having an entirely new character, and again, an amazing new character in Sophia Falcone, but a new character, you kind of run the risk of having her be a big part of this movie by having to reset up the character again in the Batman Part 2. It's going to be dangerous if Matt Reeves just assumes, oh, everyone will figure it out and everyone will know. So, to be honest, I think that there is actually maybe less than a 50-50 shot that Sophia Falcone appears in the Batman Part 2. And we'll go through the percentages right now, that my particular percentages right now, but I would give it a much lower percentage than I think I would, having Oz have a prominent presence in the Batman Part 2. So, in terms of Oz, I would give Oz a 75% chance that he is one of the major side villains in the show. And, we're just taking that 5 or 6 scenes kind of comment here, and based on where he is at the end of the Batman, or at the end of the Penguin, I would give it maybe a 75% chance that he is pretty much about the same level of importance as he was in the Batman Part 1, of being kind of the main side villain, right? And at this point, for those of us who have seen the show, it's going to be more poignant and it's going to be more impactful because we understand who he is and what his motivations are. But even for people who haven't seen the show, I think it should be more interesting because they've seen the Batman Part 1, and now they're going to get the character more developed. So I think 75%. In terms of whether or not Sophia Falcone will even show up in the Batman Part 2, and I'm not even talking about a cameo, I'm talking about more having a couple scenes in the show, for example, I would give it maybe a 1 in 3, 33% chance that she shows up. I still don't think it's super likely, just again, because of the heavy lifting that they're going to have to do here for this character, and just explaining why she's in Arkham and who she is and all these kinds of things. But it's not impossible, right? Because Carmine Falcone was a big part of the Batman, and so just maybe it's a quick scene of having to explain, okay, she's Carmine's daughter, and then she had to run out with the Penguin and all these kinds of things. Who knows, right? Maybe Selena Kyle is the one who explains all these things to Bruce Wayne, but I give it maybe a 1 in 3 chance here. that we see her in the Batman Part 2. Now, the final thing I wanted to touch upon is that whether or not we're going to get a Penguin Season 2. And I have to imagine, I'm going to give it something like an 85% chance because I think the Penguin will get all sorts of Emmy considerations. And because of Colin Farrell's comments about saying, well, you know, I signed up for 3 Batman films, I don't think the Penguin is going to die in the Batman Part 2. Could be totally wrong. Maybe he just signed a contract that said 3 films and they're going to kill him off in the Batman Part 2. Who knows? If it fits for the story, it works, you know, that's great. But I suspect that at this point, there's a very high likelihood we're going to get a Penguin Season 2. So there is that. Guys, let me know in the comments down below, do you think that Penguin will have a major role in the Batman Part 2? Do you think Sophia Falcone will even show up? And do you think that there will be a Penguin Season 2? Let me know in the comments down below.